The wind was howling across the empty fields as Jake pulled his old truck down the dirt road leading to his house. 3 days of chasing cattle in the cold had worn him out, but something made him decide to come home early. Maybe it was the way. The sky looked so dark and angry, or maybe it was just that feeling in his gut that told him he needed to be with his boys. Jake had been working these lands for 15 years now. He knew every hill, every fence post, and every shortcut home. His hands were rough from years of ranch work, and his face showed the lines that come from squinting into the sun day after day. At 35, he was still strong, but being a single dad to 3 little boys while trying to keep the ranch running was getting harder each year. As his truck bounced over the potholes in the driveway, Jake could see the yellow porch light was on. That was good. It meant someone was home. But something felt wrong. The house looked too quiet. Usually, when he came home, the boys would come running out to meet him even in the cold. Tonight, there was nothing. He parked the truck and sat for a moment listening. That's when he heard it. A sound that made his blood turn to ice. Crying. Soft, muffled crying coming from somewhere around the back of the house. Jake jumped out of the truck and ran toward the sound, his boots slipping on the frozen ground. What he found behind his house would stay with him for the rest of his life. There, huddled together on the back porch steps, were his 3 sons. Tommy, his 8-year-old, had his arms wrapped around 6-year-old Sam and 4-year-old Ben. They were sharing one thin blanket that barely covered all 3 of them. The boys were shaking so hard they could barely speak. Their lips had turned blue, and Jake could see ice crystals forming on their eyebrows and hair. Little Ben's teeth were chattering so loudly it sounded like a woodpecker. Sam was trying not to cry, but tears kept rolling down his red cheeks. Tommy, the oldest, was doing his best to keep his brothers warm, but Jake could see the boy was scared and confused. "Daddy!" Ben cried when he saw his father. The little boy tried to run to him but stumbled because his legs were so cold and stiff. Jake caught his youngest son and pulled him close, feeling how ice-cold the child's skin was through his thin pajamas. "What are you boys doing out here?" Jake asked, though his heart was already telling him the answer. He looked toward the kitchen window and could see Maria, his wife of 2 years, sitting at the kitchen table. She was drinking coffee and watching the small television on the counter. She looked warm and comfortable. Tommy looked up at his dad with eyes that seemed older than they should be. "She locked us out, Daddy. She said we were too loud and needed to think about what we did wrong." "How long have you been out here?" Jake's voice was shaking and not from the cold. "Since you left this morning," Sam whispered. "We tried knocking, but she said if we made any more noise, we'd have to stay out all night." Jake felt a rage building inside him that was hotter than any fire. His boys had been outside in freezing weather for almost 12 hours. The temperature had dropped to well below freezing, and the wind made it feel even colder. These were his babies, and someone he trusted had put them in danger. He gathered all 3 boys in his arms and carried them to his truck. The heater was still running, and he cranked it up as high as it would go. He wrapped them in the extra jackets he kept in the back seat and held them close until their shivering started to slow down. "Are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked, checking each boy carefully. Their hands and feet were like ice, but thank God they seemed to be okay, just cold. Very, very cold. Ben snuggled into his father's chest. "We thought you weren't coming home, Daddy. We thought we were going to freeze." "I'm here now," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe. Daddy's here, and I'm never going to let this happen again." As he held his sons in the warm truck, Jake's mind was racing. How had he not known? How had he trusted someone who could do this to his children? Maria had seemed so caring when they first met. She had said she wanted to be a mother to his boys. She had promised to take good care of them while he worked. Through the kitchen window, he could still see Maria. She hadn't even come outside to check on the boys. She hadn't seemed worried or surprised when she heard his truck pull up. It was as if she had been expecting him to find them eventually and didn't care. Jake's hands clenched into fists as he thought about his boys sitting out here in the dark, cold and scared, wondering if their daddy was ever coming home. Tommy had been trying to protect his little brothers, doing the job that should have been Maria's. An 8-year-old boy shouldn't have to carry that kind of responsibility. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Sam asked quietly. No, son. You're not in trouble. You didn't do anything wrong. Jake's voice was gentle, but inside he was furious. What did she say you did that was so bad? The boys looked at each other before Tommy spoke up. We were playing with our cars in the living room. We weren't being loud, just making the car sounds, you know. She came in and yelled at us to stop. When we did stop, she said we took too long and needed to learn respect. She said bad kids don't get to be warm. Ben added in his small voice. Jake felt his heart breaking. These were good boys. They weren't perfect, but they were just kids being kids. They didn't deserve to be punished like this. No child did. As the boys warmed up in the truck, Jake made a decision. This was not going to happen again. Ever. He had worked so hard to provide for his family, to give his boys a stable home after their mother had passed away from cancer 3 years ago. He had thought Maria would be the answer to their prayers, a mother figure who would love and care for his sons. Instead, she had become their nightmare. Jake looked at his 3 boys, now finally warm and safe in his arms. Tommy had fallen asleep, exhausted from trying to protect his brothers all day. Sam was still sniffling but had stopped crying. Ben was sucking his thumb, something he only did when he was really scared or upset. These children were his whole world. They were the reason he got up every morning and worked until his body ached. Everything he did was for them, and while he had been out working to support his family, someone he should have been able to trust had been hurting them. The wind was still howling outside the truck, and snow was starting to fall. Jake realized that if he hadn't come home early, if he had stayed out there one more night like he had planned, his boys might not have survived. The thought made him feel sick. He started the truck and drove slowly toward the front of the house. The boys were warm now and he needed to get them inside and fed. But first he was going to have a talk with Maria. A very serious talk. As they pulled up to the front porch, Jake saw Maria peek through the curtains. She quickly stepped back, and he could see her moving around the house, probably trying to make it look like she had been busy cooking or cleaning. Boys, I want you to go straight to your room when we get inside, Jake said. Get into your warm pajamas and get under your blankets. I'll bring you some hot chocolate and something to eat in just a few minutes. Is she going to be mad at us? Ben asked. No, buddy. She's not going to be mad at you. You don't need to worry about that anymore. Jake helped his sons out of the truck and walked them to the front door. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from anger. The woman inside had betrayed his trust and endangered his children. The woman he had married, thinking she would help him raise his boys, had instead become someone he needed to protect them from. As he reached for the door handle, Jake made a silent promise to his sons and to himself. Whatever happened next, his boys would never again be left out in the cold. They would never again have to wonder if their daddy was coming home to save them. The early return that had started as a simple change of plans was about to change everything. Jake's hands were shaking as he unlocked the front door. Not from the cold this time, but from pure anger. He helped his 3 boys inside, and they immediately ran to their bedroom like he had told them to. He could hear them whispering to each other as they changed into warm clothes. The house felt different now. What used to be his safe haven, his refuge after long days of work, now felt like a place where his children had been in danger. The familiar smell of coffee and the sound of the television seemed wrong somehow, too normal for what had just happened. Maria was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in. She looked up at him with a surprised expression, as if she hadn't expected him home so soon. She was wearing a comfortable sweater and fuzzy slippers, clearly warm and cozy while his boys had been freezing outside. "Oh, you're back early," she said, taking a sip from her coffee mug. "How did the cattle drive go?" Jake stared at her for a long moment. How could she sit there acting like nothing had happened? How could she be so calm when she knew his children had been locked outside in the freezing cold? "Where are my boys, Maria?" His voice was low and controlled, but she should have heard the danger in it. "They're probably in their room. They were misbehaving earlier, so I sent them outside to think about what they did. They should have learned their lesson by now." "You sent them outside?" Jake's voice got louder. "You locked 3 little boys. Outside in below freezing weather for 12 hours? Maria shrugged like it was no big deal. They were being disrespectful, running around the house making noise, not listening when I told them to stop. They needed to learn that there are consequences for bad behavior. They're children, Maria. They're 6, 4, and 8 years old. Exactly. And if they don't learn respect now, they never will. She stood up and walked to the sink, rinsing out her coffee mug like they were having a normal conversation. My mother used to lock me out when I was bad. It taught me discipline. Jake felt like he was talking to a stranger. This wasn't the woman he had married, the woman who had smiled at his boys and promised to love them like her own, the woman who had convinced him that his children needed a mother's touch. Maria, they could have died out there. Do you understand that? The temperature dropped to 20 degrees. They were in their pajamas with one thin blanket. Don't be dramatic, Jake. It was only for a few hours. It was 12 hours. I found them blue and shaking, crying because they thought I wasn't coming home. For the first time, Maria looked a little uncomfortable. She turned away from him and started wiping down the already clean counter. Well, maybe next time they'll listen the first time I tell them something. Next time? Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. There isn't going to be a next time. You're never going to punish my children like that again. Maria spun around to face him, and for a moment Jake saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. Something cold and mean. Those aren't my children, Jake. I didn't sign up to be some kind of babysitter for your brats. The word hit Jake like a punch to the stomach. Brats. She had called his boys brats. His sweet, innocent children who had lost their mother and were just trying to find their place in the world. Then why did you marry me? Jake asked. You knew I had 3 sons. You said you wanted to be part of our family. I wanted to be your wife, not their mother. There's a difference. Maria's voice was getting sharper now. You're never here anyway. You're always out working, leaving me stuck with 3 kids who aren't even mine. They don't listen to me, they don't respect me, and I'm tired of dealing with them. They're good kids, Maria. They just need love and patience. What they need is discipline. Real discipline. Not the soft treatment you give them. She threw the dish towel on the counter. You spoil them, Jake. You make them think they can do whatever they want without consequences. Jake thought about his boys huddled together on that cold porch, scared and confused. That wasn't spoiled behavior. That was 3 little boys who had been hurt by someone they should have been able to trust. What exactly did they do today that was so terrible? Jake asked. Maria rolled her eyes. They were playing with those stupid cars of theirs, making all that noise. I told them to stop, but they kept going for another few seconds. That's disrespect, Jake. Pure disrespect. They were playing with toy cars in their own home. They were being loud and annoying. Jake shook his head. He was starting to understand that this wasn't just about today. This wasn't just one bad decision. This was who Maria really was when he wasn't around. How long has this been going on? He asked. What do you mean? How long have you been locking my children outside? Maria hesitated for just a second, and Jake saw the truth in her eyes before she even spoke. I don't lock them outside. Sometimes they need to cool off. Sometimes they need to think about their behavior. In the cold. Without coats. For hours. It's not that bad, Jake. You're being overdramatic. Jake walked to the back door and pointed outside. Maria, there's ice on the ground, there's frost on the windows. My 4-year-old son's lips were blue. How is that not that bad? Kids are tougher than you think. They're babies, Maria. Ben still sleeps with a stuffed animal. Sam is afraid. Of the dark. Tommy just learned to tie his own shoes. They're not tough ranch hands, they're little boys who need someone to take care of them. Maria crossed her arms and glared at him. Well, maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to work all the time. Maybe you should stay home and take care of them yourself if you don't like how I do it. I work to provide for this family. I work so we can have this house, so the boys can have food and clothes and everything they need. What about what I need, Jake? What about the fact that I'm stuck here all day with 3 kids who aren't even grateful for what I do? What do you do? The question came out harder than Jake meant it to, but he was past caring about hurting her feelings. I keep them fed. I make sure they don't burn the house down. I try to teach them some manners, but you undermine me every time you come home. Jake thought about his boys' faces when he found them outside. He thought about how Tommy had been trying to protect his little brothers. He thought about how scared they had been. Maria, normal people don't lock children outside in the cold. Normal people don't punish kids for playing with toys. What you did today was wrong, and it's never going to happen again. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you how it's going to be. My children's safety comes first. Always. Maria stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could see her calculating something in her head. Finally, she smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. Fine, she said, but don't come crying to me when those boys grow up to be disrespectful little monsters because their daddy was too soft to discipline them properly. Jake didn't trust himself to respond to that. Instead, he turned and walked toward his son's bedroom. He had promised them hot chocolate and something to eat, and he wasn't going to let them down again. As he heated milk on the stove, Jake could hear Maria moving around the house behind him. She was muttering to herself, but he couldn't make out the words, and he didn't want to. The boy's bedroom was quiet when he knocked on the door. "Can I come in?" "Yes, Daddy," came Tommy's voice. Jake pushed open the door and found all three boys under the covers in Tommy's bed. They had pushed their beds together and were huddled under every blanket they could find. They looked at him with wide, worried eyes. "I brought hot chocolate," Jake said softly. Ben sat up first, always the bravest when it came to treats, but even he seemed hesitant. "Is she mad at us?" "No, buddy. You don't need to worry about that. You boys didn't do anything wrong." Sam peeked out from under the blankets. "Are we going to have to go back outside?" Jake's heart broke all over again. "No, son. You're never going back outside like that, I promise." He sat on the edge of Tommy's bed and handed out the warm mugs. The boys wrapped their small hands around the cups, still trying to get completely warm. "Daddy," Tommy said quietly, "she's done that before. When you go away to work, she locks us out and tells us that bad kids don't deserve to be warm." Jake felt like someone had punched him in the chest. "How many times, Tommy?" The 8-year-old looked at his brothers, then back at his father. "Lots of times. Almost every time you leave." "Why didn't you tell me?" "She said if we told, she'd make sure we never saw you again. She said she'd tell everyone we were lying and that no one would believe us anyway because we're just kids." Jake pulled his oldest son into his arms. "Tommy, I will always believe you, always, and nothing is ever going to take me away from you boys." As his 3 sons drank their hot chocolate and slowly began to warm up, Jake made another silent promise. This was just the beginning. He was going to find out exactly what had been happening in his house while he was away. And then he was going to make sure it never happened again. Outside, the wind was still howling. But inside the boys' room, with his children safe in his arms, Jake started planning what he was going to do next. Jake didn't sleep at all that night. He stayed in the boys' room, sitting in the old rocking chair he used to use when they were babies. Every time one of them stirred or made a sound, he was right there, making sure they were okay. Making sure they knew they were safe. Maria had gone to bed without another word to any of them. Jake could hear her moving around in their bedroom, but he didn't care what she was doing. His focus was entirely on his sons now. When morning came, Jake called his boss and told him he wouldn't be coming to work for a few days. He had some family issues to take care of. His boss, a good man who had known Jake for years, didn't ask any questions. He just told Jake to take all the time he needed. After the boys had breakfast, Jake sat them down in the living room. He needed to know the truth about what had been happening in his house. "Boys, I need you to tell me everything. I know it might be scary, but I promise you won't get in trouble, no matter what you say." Tommy looked toward the hallway where Maria's bedroom was, then back at his father. "She said if we told, bad things would happen." "Nothing bad is going to happen. I'm your daddy and it's my job to protect you, but I can't protect you if I don't know what's been going on." Slowly, carefully, the boys began to tell their story. And with each word, Jake felt sicker and angrier. It wasn't just the locking them outside. That was bad enough, but it was only part of what Maria had been doing to his children. She had been locking the refrigerator and the pantry with padlocks, telling the boys that they could only eat when she decided it was time. Sometimes, that meant they went to school hungry because she said they hadn't earned breakfast. She had thrown away some of their toys, claiming they were too messy or too loud. Their favorite books, the ones their real mother used to read to them, had mysteriously disappeared. When the boys asked about them, Maria said they must have been careless and lost them. She had been making them do chores that were too hard for their ages. Ben, who was only 4, had been expected to scrub the bathroom floor on his hands and knees. When he couldn't do it well enough, she made him do it over and over again until he was crying. The worst part was the emotional punishment. Maria had been telling the boys that their real mother was disappointed in them from heaven. She said their mother was watching them be bad and was sad that they weren't better kids. "She said Mommy doesn't love us anymore because we're not good," Ben whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks. Jake pulled his youngest son into his lap, his own eyes filling with tears. "That's not true, Ben. That's not true at all. Your mommy loved you more than anything in the whole world, and she still does. She's watching over you because she loves you, not because she's disappointed." Tommy, trying to be brave like always, spoke up next. "She said if we told you any of this, you'd get so mad that you'd go away forever just like Mommy did. Your mommy didn't go away because she wanted to, son. She got sick, and sometimes when people get really sick, their bodies can't fight anymore. But she didn't choose to leave you. And I'm never going to leave you. Never." Sam, who had been quiet during most of this, suddenly burst into tears. "I tried to be good, Daddy. I tried really hard, but she was always angry anyway." Jake spent the next hour holding his boys and reassuring them that none of this was their fault. They were good kids. They had always been good kids. They didn't deserve any of what had happened to them. After the boys were settled and playing quietly in their room, Jake decided to look around the house. He needed to see if there was evidence of what his sons had told him. In the kitchen, he found the padlocks on the refrigerator and pantry just like they had said. The keys were hidden in Maria's jewelry box. Inside the locked pantry, he found snacks and treats that his boys loved but hadn't seen in months. In the laundry room, he found garbage bags full of the boys' belongings, toys, books, clothes that still fit them, all thrown away like trash. In one bag, he found the picture books that their real mother used to read to them every night before bed. Jake sat on the laundry room floor holding one of those books and cried. His wife, his boy's real mother, had saved up money from her part-time job to buy these special books. She had read them every single night, even when she was too sick to get out of bed. And Maria had thrown them away like they meant nothing. But the worst discovery was yet to come. In Maria's nightstand, Jake found a small notebook. At first he thought it might be a diary, but as he read, he realized it was something much more disturbing. It was a record of punishments she had given the boys, written like she was proud of what she had done. Tommy talked back when I told him to clean his room. Locked outside for 3 hours, next time he'll remember to show respect. Sam spilled juice on the floor. No dinner and no breakfast the next morning. Children need to learn consequences. Ben wouldn't stop crying after I threw away his stuffed rabbit. Outside until he learned to control himself. Crying is manipulation. Page after page of punishments, each one worse than the last. Jake realized that Maria had been systematically tormenting his children for months, maybe even since they had gotten married. She had been careful to do it only when he was away, and she had scared the boys into silence. There were also notes about Jake himself. Comments about how he was too soft and how the boys were spoiled and out of control. She had written about her plans to fix them, to make them into proper children through discipline and punishment. The final entry was from just a few days ago, before Jake had left for the cattle drive. The boys are getting harder to control. Tommy is starting to protect the little ones, and Sam is getting braver about speaking up. I need to do something that will remind them who's in charge. Next time Jake leaves, I'm going to show them what happens to children who don't respect their elders. Jake realized that what he had found yesterday was Maria's big plan. She had intended to leave his boys outside all night, in below-freezing temperatures. If he hadn't come home early, if he had stayed on the range for one more night like he had planned, his children might have died. He sat in the bedroom holding the notebook and tried to understand how he had been so blind. How had he not seen what kind of person Maria really was? How had he missed the signs that his children were being hurt? The answer, he realized, was that Maria had been very careful. She was sweet and loving when he was around, always fussing over the boys and talking about how much she cared for them. She had timed her punishments for when he was away, and she had scared the boys into keeping quiet. She had also been smart about the emotional manipulation. She had convinced Jake that the boys were just having a hard time adjusting to having a new mother figure. When they seemed withdrawn or upset, she had explanations. They were missing their real mother. They were having trouble at school. They were just going through a phase. Jake had believed her because he wanted to believe her. He had been so desperate to give his boys a complete family, so grateful to find someone who seemed willing to take on 3 young children, that he had ignored his instincts. There had been signs, he realized now. The boys had become quieter over the past few months. They didn't run to greet him with the same enthusiasm when he came home. They seemed more careful, more worried about making mistakes. He had noticed that they were often hungry when he got home, even though Maria said she had fed them. He had seen that some of their favorite things had gone missing, but Maria always had reasonable explanations. Most telling of all, the boys had stopped talking about their day when he asked. Before Maria, they would chatter excitedly about everything they had done, everyone they had seen, every little adventure they had experienced. Lately, they just said fine when he asked how their day was. Jake felt like he had failed his children in the worst possible way. He had brought danger into their home. He had trusted someone who had hurt them. He had been so focused on providing for them financially that he had missed the fact that they were being terrorized emotionally and physically. But feeling sorry for himself wasn't going to help his boys now. They needed him to be strong. They needed him to fix this situation and make sure they were safe. Jake gathered up all the evidence he had found, the notebook, the padlocks, the bags of thrown-away belongings. He took pictures of everything with his phone. Then he started making calls. First, he called his sister Lisa, who lived about an hour away. She had always been close to the boys, and he trusted her completely. He explained what had happened, and she immediately offered to take the boys for a few days while he sorted things out. Next, he called a lawyer. The legal situation was complicated, he was told. Maria was legally his wife and the boys' stepmother. She had rights in the household. But what she had done constituted child endangerment and abuse. There were steps Jake could take to protect his children. Finally, Jake called the school. He spoke to the principal and explained that his boys had been going through a difficult situation at home. He wanted to know if the teachers had noticed anything unusual. The principal was quiet for a moment, then asked if they could meet in person. There were some things she needed to discuss with him. That afternoon, while the boys played at Lisa's house, Jake sat in the principal's office and learned even more disturbing things about what his sons had been enduring. The next morning, Jake woke up in his sister Lisa's guest room and made the hardest phone call of his life. He called Maria and told her they needed to talk, but not at the house. He asked her to meet him at the diner in town. Maria seemed surprised by the request, but she agreed. Jake could hear something in her voice, like she knew this conversation wasn't going to go the way she wanted. Before leaving for the diner, Jake checked on his boys. They were having breakfast with their Aunt Lisa, and for the first time in months, they looked relaxed. Tommy was actually laughing at something Lisa had said. Sam was eating pancakes without looking worried about making a mess. Ben was playing with his food, making little faces out of blueberries, something Maria would have punished him for. "Daddy, can we stay here today too?" Ben asked when he saw his father. "Yes, buddy. You're going to stay with Aunt Lisa for a few more days while Daddy takes care of some grown-up stuff." "Are we in trouble?" Sam asked, that familiar worried look creeping back into his eyes. "No, son. You're not in trouble. You're never going to be in trouble for just being kids. I promise." Lisa walked Jake to the door. She had been up most of the night listening to him tell her everything he had discovered. Her eyes were still red from crying. "Those boys have been through hell," she whispered so the children couldn't hear. But they're tough, Jake. They're going to be okay. Kids are more resilient than we think. I should have known, Jake said, for probably the 10th time since yesterday. I should have protected them. You couldn't have known. She fooled everyone. What matters now is what you do next. Jake hugged his sister and promised to call her later. Then he drove to the diner to face the woman who had been torturing his children. Maria was already there when he arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee. She smiled when she saw him, that same sweet smile that had fooled him for so long. "This is nice," she said as he sat down across from her. "We haven't been out together in ages. Maybe after breakfast we could go shopping or see a movie." Jake looked at her carefully. She seemed genuinely happy, like she thought this was some kind of romantic date. It was hard to believe this was the same person who had written those terrible things about his children in her notebook. "Maria, we need to talk about what happened the other night." Her smile faded a little. "Oh, that. Jake, I think you overreacted. The boys were fine. They learned their lesson. They could have died. Don't be so dramatic. They were outside for a few hours. It wasn't that cold." Jake pulled out his phone and showed her the weather report from that night. It was 18 degrees, Maria. 18 degrees with a wind chill that made it feel like 5 below zero. Maria glanced at the phone and shrugged. "Kids are tougher than people think." "They're not tough, Maria. They're little boys. Ben is 4 years old. 4-year-olds aren't tough. They're babies who need someone to take care of them." "Well, maybe if you were home more often, you could take care of them yourself." Jake had expected this. He had expected her to try to make it his fault somehow, but he was ready for it now. "I found your notebook, Maria." For the first time since he had sat down, Maria looked genuinely surprised and scared. "What notebook?" "The one in your nightstand. The one where you wrote down every punishment you gave my boys. The one where you planned to leave them outside all night." Maria's face went very pale. She looked around the diner like she was trying to find an escape route. "I don't know what you're talking about. I have pictures of every page. I also found the padlocks you put on the refrigerator, the bags of their toys and books that you threw away, all of it." Maria stared at him for a long moment. Then suddenly, her whole attitude changed. The sweet, innocent act dropped away, and Jake saw the real Maria for the first time. "So what?" she said, her voice cold and hard. "Those boys needed discipline. Real discipline. You were too soft on them, so I had to do what needed to be done. You starved them. You threw away things that belonged to their dead mother. You locked them outside in freezing weather. I taught them respect, something their precious daddy never bothered to do." Jake felt his anger rising, but he kept his voice calm. "They're children, Maria. They're supposed to play and make noise and sometimes make mistakes. That's what children do. Not in my house. Not when I'm the one stuck dealing with them all day while you're off playing cowboy." "Playing cowboy? I was working to support our family. Your family, not mine. I didn't sign up to be a babysitter for 3 brats." There was that word again. Brats. Jake realized that Maria had probably never seen his boys as anything more than an inconvenience, something she had to tolerate to be married to him. "Then why did you marry me? You knew I had children." Maria laughed, but it wasn't a nice sound. "I thought you'd send them away to boarding school or something. Rich ranchers do that, don't they? Send their kids away so adults can have adult lives? I'm not rich, Maria. And even if I was, I would never send my children away. More's the pity. Those boys would have been better off somewhere else. At least, there they might have learned some manners." Jake stared at this woman he thought he had known. How had he been so wrong about her? How had he missed seeing this coldness, this cruelty? "I want you out of my house," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" "I want you out of my house. Today. Pack your things and leave." Maria leaned back in the booth and crossed her arms. "I don't think so, Jake. I'm your wife. That's my house too. You can't just kick me out. Watch me. I'll fight you on this. I'll tell everyone that you're an unfit father who leaves his children alone all the time. I'll tell them that you're abusive and unstable. Go ahead. I have your notebook, remember? I have pictures of everything you did to my boys. I have statements from their teachers about the changes they saw in my children. Try to convince people that I'm the problem." For the first time, Maria looked worried. Really worried. "You don't understand how divorce works, Jake. I'm entitled to half of everything, the house, the land, the money, everything. Take it. Take whatever you want. I don't care about the money or even the house. All I care about is getting you away from my children. You can't afford to lose half of everything. How will you support those precious boys of yours?" Jake stood up from the booth. "I'll figure it out. I always do. But you're not going to be part of their lives anymore. I won't let you hurt them again." Maria's eyes narrowed. "This isn't over, Jake. I'll make your life hell. I'll make sure you regret this. The only thing I regret is not seeing who you really were sooner." Jake left money on the table for the coffee and walked out of the diner. His hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. From relief. He had done it. He had stood up to her. But Maria was right about one thing. The legal process was going to be complicated and expensive. Jake drove straight from the diner to his lawyer's office. The lawyer, a kind older man who had helped Jake with his first wife's estate, listened carefully to everything Jake told him. He looked at the pictures of Maria's notebook and shook his head sadly. "This is definitely child abuse," he said. "No question about it. But you're right that the divorce is going to be difficult. She's entitled to claim half of the marital assets. I don't care about that. I just want her away from my boys." "I understand. And given this evidence, I think we can get an emergency restraining order. She won't be allowed to come near you or the children while the divorce is pending." "How long will that take?" "Could be months, maybe longer if she fights it. Do you have somewhere safe for the boys to stay?" Jake thought about Lisa's house and about his boys laughing at breakfast that morning. "Yes, they'll be safe." The lawyer started the paperwork immediately. By that afternoon, a sheriff's deputy was at Jake's house, serving Maria with the restraining order and supervising while she packed her belongings. Jake wasn't there for that. He couldn't bear to see her in his house again, touching things that belonged to his children. Instead, he stayed at Lisa's, playing with his boys and trying to explain what was happening in words they could understand. "Is she coming back?" Tommy asked. "No, son. She's not coming back. She's not going to live with us anymore." "Good," Sam said quietly. "I didn't like her very much." "She was mean to us," Ben added, snuggling closer to his father. "I know she was. And I'm sorry I didn't know sooner. But she's never going to be mean to you again." Over the next few days, friends and neighbors started reaching out to Jake. Word had gotten around the small community about what had happened, and people were shocked. Many of them admitted that they had suspected something wasn't right, but they hadn't known how to help. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door, came by Lisa's house with tears in her eyes. "I saw those boys outside in the cold so many times," she said. "I should have called someone. I should have done something." "You couldn't have known," Jake told her, using the same words Lisa had said to him. "I could have known if I had paid attention, if I had cared enough to really look." Jake realized that everyone was dealing with their own guilt about not protecting his children. The whole community felt like they had failed his boys. But instead of wallowing in guilt, the community decided to take action. Neighbors started, dropping off food and offering to help with childcare. Jake's boss told him to take as much time off as he needed, and that his job would be waiting for him when he was ready to come back. 6 months later, Jake stood in his kitchen making breakfast for his boys. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. The house was theirs again. The locks were gone from the refrigerator and pantry. The boys' toys were back in their proper places. Their mother's books were back on the shelf, and every night Jake read one of them before bedtime. The divorce had been finalized just last month. Maria had tried to fight it at first, just like she had threatened. She had claimed that Jake was an unfit parent and that the children were better off with her. But when the judge saw the evidence of what she had done, there was no question about who should have custody. Maria had gotten her half of the house value and some of the savings, just like she had demanded. Jake had to take out a loan to pay her off, but he didn't care. His boys were worth any amount of money. The best part was that Maria was completely out of their lives now. The restraining order was still in effect, and she wasn't allowed to contact Jake or the boys in any way. Jake heard through mutual friends that she had moved to another state, which was fine with him. The farther away she was from his children, the better. The changes in his boys over the past 6 months had been amazing to watch. It hadn't happened overnight, of course. The first few weeks after Maria left had been difficult. The boys were jumpy and nervous, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. They had trouble believing that they were really safe. Tommy had been the hardest to convince. At 8 years old, he had understood more about what was happening than his younger brothers, and he had taken on so much responsibility for protecting them. It took time for him to learn that he could be a kid again, that it wasn't his job to take care of everyone. But slowly, Tommy had started to relax. He began laughing more, playing more, acting like the 8-year-old boy he was supposed to be. Just last week, he had come home from school excited about joining the baseball team. The old Tommy, the one who had existed before Maria, had loved baseball. Sam had bounced back faster than his older brother. At 6, he was more resilient and quicker to trust that things had really changed. He had started talking again, chattering about his day at school, his friends, the bugs he found in the backyard. The quiet, worried little boy was disappearing, replaced by a happy kid who laughed at his own jokes. Ben, the youngest, had needed the most patience. He had nightmares for weeks after Maria left, waking up crying and asking if the mean lady was coming back. But children are amazing in their ability to heal, and eventually, Ben's nightmares had stopped. Now he slept peacefully through the night, usually with his favorite stuffed animal that Jake had rescued from one of Maria's garbage bags. The biggest change Jake had made was in his work schedule. He had realized that he couldn't keep working long cattle drives that took him away from home for days at a time. His boys needed him there, needed to know that he wasn't going to disappear on them. Jake had worked out a deal with his boss to take on different responsibilities. He still worked with cattle, but now he did shorter jobs that allowed him to be home every night. Sometimes he took the boys with him when the work was safe and the weather was good. They loved riding in the truck with their dad, feeling like they were part of his work. The pay wasn't as good as it had been before, but Jake had learned that money wasn't everything. His children's happiness and security were worth more than any paycheck. Jake had also made sure that the boys got professional help to deal with what they had been through. Once a week, they all went to see a counselor who specialized in helping children recover from abuse. At first, the boys had been reluctant to talk to a stranger, but Dr. Williams was good at her job. She made the boys feel safe and comfortable. Through their sessions, the boys had learned that what Maria did to them wasn't normal. They had learned that it wasn't their fault. They had learned that it was okay to be angry about what had happened to them, and that it was okay to feel sad sometimes about losing their stepmother, even though she had been mean to them. Dr. Williams had helped Jake too. She had taught him warning signs to watch for, ways to make sure his children felt safe talking to him about anything that worried them. She had helped him understand that healing was a process, not something that happened. All at once, the community support had been incredible. Jake's neighbors had become like an extended family to his boys. Mrs. Patterson, who had felt so guilty about not intervening sooner, had become like a grandmother to them. She watched the boys when Jake had to work late, and she always had fresh cookies and warm hugs ready. The local school had also been amazing. The principal had made sure that all the boys' teachers knew about their situation, so everyone could watch for signs of lingering trauma. The school counselor checked in with them regularly. The boys were all doing better in school now that they weren't worried about what was waiting for them at home. Jake's sister Lisa had been a lifesaver during the worst of it. She had kept the boys for 2 weeks while Jake got the house ready for them to come home. She had helped him throw away anything that reminded them of Maria, and she had helped him make the house feel safe and welcoming again. Even now, 6 months later, Lisa came over for dinner at least once a week. The boys adored their aunt, and Jake was grateful to have family support. But the most important change was in Jake himself. He had learned to be present with his children in a way he hadn't been before. He listened more carefully when they talked. He paid attention to their moods and their needs. He had learned to trust his instincts when something didn't feel right. Jake had also learned not to blame himself for what had happened. Dr. Williams had helped him understand that Maria was very good at manipulation. She had fooled everyone, not just him. What mattered now wasn't the past, but how he protected his children going forward. On this particular morning, as Jake flipped pancakes and listened to his boys arguing about whose turn it was to feed their dog, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Daddy, Ben said, tugging on his father's shirt. Can we go see the horses today? Maybe this afternoon, buddy, after we clean up the house a little. Can we help clean? Sam asked. I like using the vacuum. Jake smiled. His boys actually wanted to help with chores now, because they knew they wouldn't be punished if they didn't do them perfectly. They had learned that their home was a place where making mistakes was okay, where being a kid was allowed. Of course you can help. We'll make it fun. Tommy looked up from his cereal. Dad, can Billy come over after we're done cleaning? His mom said it was okay if you said yes. Sure, son. Maybe Billy can come have dinner with us too. Jake loved that. His boys were making friends again, that they felt comfortable inviting people to their house. For months after Maria left, they had been reluctant to have anyone over, like they were afraid that having guests might somehow bring back the bad times. As they finished breakfast and started their Saturday chores, Jake thought about how different their lives were now. It wasn't perfect. Money was tighter than it had been before. Jake was tired a lot from working and taking care of 3 active boys by himself. Sometimes he felt overwhelmed and wasn't sure he was doing everything right. But it was good. It was really good. The boys were happy. They were healthy. They felt safe and loved. They were growing up to be kind, confident children who knew that their father would always be there for them. That afternoon, Jake kept his promise and took the boys to see the horses. As they walked through the pasture, Ben holding tightly to his father's hand, Sam running ahead to pet his favorite mare, and Tommy asking intelligent questions about horse care, Jake felt overwhelmed with gratitude. He was grateful that he had come home early that cold night 6 months ago. He was grateful that his boys had survived what Maria had done to them. He was grateful for his community, his family, and the second chance they had all been given. Most of all, he was grateful that his children would grow up knowing that they were loved, that they were safe, and that their father would always choose them above everything else. As the sun began to set over the ranch, Jake gathered his 3 sons for the walk back to the house. They were chattering excitedly about their day, making plans for tomorrow, acting like the normal happy children they deserved to be. The lone cowboy wasn't alone anymore. He had his boys, and they had each other, and that was all they needed. That night. After the boys were in bed and the house was quiet, Jake sat on his front porch and looked up at the stars. He thought about his first wife, the boys' real mother, and he felt like she was smiling down on them. He had kept his promise to her. He had protected their children. He had made sure they grew up knowing they were loved. The cold winter night, when he had found his boys locked outside, felt like a lifetime ago. That terrible night had been the beginning of the end of their nightmare, but it had also been the beginning of their real life together. Jake went inside, checked on each of his sleeping sons one more time, and went to bed knowing that tomorrow would be another good day. There would be breakfast and laughter, work and play, the ordinary moments that make up a happy childhood. His boys were safe. They were home, and they always would be.